I've been looking for some people that we could feel something in common with about history and genealogy, our life projects. And we found you, and we're just thrilled to death. And we're so tickled for the warm reception that you've given us 2 or 3 times we've been here since we first found you. So thank you so much. I hope that we can contribute to the group in the days to come. I was tickled to death to hear about this thing about the kids. You know, that's an awesome thing. Carrie and I were talking on the way over about. I said, "Did you like history when you were in school?" And she says, "Well, yeah." I said, "Did you learn anything?" "Well, I suppose I did, you know." "Did you retain any of it?" "Probably a little bit of it, you know." And the story is same with me. I remember Mr. Moore. He was my history teacher, I believe in the 9th and 10th grade both. This is back ancient history for me. And I didn't like history. All it was is remembering dates or events or something of that nature. It had no impact. And that's the one thing you learn real quickly about learning, is it has to have impact. Without impact, your brain doesn't punch it into a file and keep it. And so I didn't really get interested in history until probably starting about 1969 or 70, when I started doing genealogy. Genealogy opened the doors to history for me. And like most people, I realized that history all down through the ages was written by the victors and by the wealthy and the people in charge. And so a good part of the history that we learn in school may not be totally incorrect, and it may not be totally correct either, but it's sometimes misleading. It just doesn't give you the whole picture. And more than that, it just doesn't arouse you to think about it. Well, you know, history is the greatest teacher there is. If we learn history, we learn the mistakes of the past. And hopefully, we don't repeat them. Many times we do, but hopefully we don't. I think that had I not gotten involved in genealogy, that I would have passed on like most of it, and I would miss so many things. I've met Carrie in 1991, and Carrie has been really lucky. She got to work at the Clayton Library down here in Houston for about 3 years, and she's pretty good with genealogy. The first time we went to a library, she took me back 100 years on about 3 lines in just about 15 minutes, you know. And I thought, wow, I captured the winner here, you know. Didn't matter that I liked her and she looked good and everything, you know. Just, actually, when we met, we were involved in a project, and I met her about 2 weeks before that, and then we were on the Thursday night, we decided we wanted to go have pizza, and so we invited her and another girl that was there and go have pizza. And somewhere in the course of the dinner, one of us mentioned genealogy, and the other 2 people just disappeared. They just, you know, evaporated and floated off into the world. You know, we didn't see them the rest of the night. And that bonded us instantly, and we've been together now, what, 27 years? Almost 28 years now, something like that. So history is a great teacher. I am a Vietnam vet, and I spent a few months in Vietnam in 1962, and that's ancient history in itself. And for 20 years, I suppose, after I came back from Vietnam, I didn't talk about Vietnam. I'd been told when I was debriefed at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines that I was not to divulge any activities that I'd been involved in while on the continent of Southeast Asia under penalty of treason. And so a 22-year-old boy doesn't argue with that. He just goes on. So I buried most of it. In 2013, a man that I'd never heard of in my life sent me an email about a book that he had written. And the reason he sent it to me is somehow or another he found my family history and found out that I am a fifth great grandson of Colonel Andrew Hampton of the Battle of Kings Mountain, South Carolina during the Revolutionary War. And so he wanted me to read this book. And I did. And I devoured it. I hadn't read a book, I don't think, up until that point in years, but I devoured it. And I told Carrie, I said, you know what? I think I could write like this. I think, you know, I know a lot of history and we studied a lot, and I think that I could maybe write something like this that people would like. And so I sat down to write the history of my fifth and sixth great grandfathers who were in West Virginia during the French and Indian War. And I failed miserably. I didn't know how to capture a character, you know, to describe them. I didn't understand any of that, and so I wrote about 100 pages of it, and I just quit. It just didn't work. But I still wanted to write. I still thought this was a good idea. So she said, "Well, why don't you write your Vietnam story?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't want to do that." You know, I said, I can't prove any of it. And you don't want to write something that you can't prove. And then I think she said, or one of us said, "Well, you know, writers are a fictional book." So I did. You know, they can't hang you for writing a fiction book, can they? At least I hope not. So I did. And I wrote it, and as I wrote it, the memories came flooding back. The greatest thing for me in my life, it was the greatest therapy for me in my life. Just, we tell everybody that if it places it blurs, it was written through a veil of tears. It was edited through a lot of it too. And, but anyway, after writing that, found out I still want to do this. So I decided I'd write another book. And I didn't know any more stories, so I decided I'd write a fictional book. So I wrote a fictional book. And then I wrote another fictional book. And then we went on a trip back to Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and to all the Civil War battlegrounds that my great-grandfather had fought in during the Civil War. And I started writing a book about them. Now, I didn't know my great-grandfather because my grandfather never talked about him. My great-grandfather had 15 children. And not at one of those family lines mentioned my great-grandfather. Not a one of them. Why? Why did they not talk about this man? And so I didn't know anything about him. I knew his date of birth, and when he went into the military, and when he came out, and when he died. And he died, I think, 10 years before my father was born. So, you know, my father never talked about him, and my grandfather never talked about him. And so when I started reading the story of the military units that he was in, the 32nd Mississippi Infantry, by the time I got through with that, I understood why he didn't talk, why they didn't talk about him. This man had to have had the worst case of PTSD that anybody could ever imagine with what he went through. There is no way of counting the numbers of men that he saw fall dying or blown apart, or just, you know, there's no way of counting. I can tell you at Perrysville, 6,000 fell. I can tell you at Franklin, 6,000 fell. I can't even tell you at Resaca, Kennesaw Mountain, and the Battle of Atlanta, and Missionary Ridge and all of these others. I don't know how many fell there that he saw, but he saw all those people die. He had to have been severely impacted by that. And that got me back to thinking about PTSD again. You know, I had suppressed so much of that stuff for so long, you know, and here's these old men who had had the same thing. Then my Uncle Berlin Smith, who was in the Battle of the Bulge in Germany in World War II, and came home. And, I didn't know much of this. My aunt just told me later that Uncle Berlin wouldn't sit down at the dinner table in Christmas and Thanksgiving and have dinner with the family. He would help. He was a cook in the military, by the way, and he wouldn't sit down with the family and have dinner. And finally, one day, she said, "Berlin," says, "why don't you sit down and have dinner with us?" And he took her aside. And on December the 25th, 1944, during the Battle of the Ardennes Forest, the Battle of the Bulge as it's called, his entire company was wiped out. They had prepared Christmas dinner for him and his co-workers. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a couple of officers walked in and said, "Boys, just put it away. There's nobody left." Well, they grabbed their rifles up and they started to head out, and they said, "No, there's no point in that." They said, "We're retreating and pulling back." And he never talked about that. He was the kindest, gentlest man that you can imagine. And he sang like a bird. He had a great tenor voice. And he was a member of a gospel quartet most of the time when I remember. He died in 1969 at 52 years old. And 2 years before his father died. His father was 84 at the time of his death. And that was, you know, that must have been, I don't remember that. I don't remember anything about my grandpa or anything, what happened at the time. In fact, I wasn't even there when my uncle died. I was several states away. But then this thing of PTSD, I didn't know what it was. You know, nobody talked about PTSD. Well, what, the Gulf War? Something like that, when they really started talking about it. And so I started digging, and I started reading. And this is the greatest impact that it has on people. And it comes out in so many different areas. It creates paths that you would not even dream of. One thing, from 1870 to 1890, I believe it was, the enrollees, or whatever you would call them, in the insane asylums doubled. And it wasn't just men, it was women too, because the women suffered greatly in that war. When the war was over, there was this huge expansion west, and it's when the Wild West started, all those outlaws. When you get down to it, about half of those old outlaws were Civil War soldiers trying to find a way to let that stuff out, you know, after all the horrors they had witnessed and everything in that time. And I thought about that, and I thought about all the soldiers from the time immemorial, I suppose, that, you know, have fought and suffered and everything. And believe me, my time in Vietnam, as far as suffering, was nothing compared to the men from 66 through 69 and 70 and the things they went through. And so many of them today, you find them still affected by that horrible disease. Some of them can't work, some of them can't function, some of them don't want to be a part of society, some of them drink to excess, so many of them are homeless, and not because they can't afford to have a place, it's because they can't be confined. And this is one of the symptoms of PTSD is men, especially who have suffered it, can't be confined. They turn into wanderers, they turn into travelers. You find Well, you don't so much anymore because we're dying off in a hurry. But back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, when I was driving trucks, so many of the truck drivers were Vietnam vets, simply because it gave them that out of having that isolation, of sitting in that truck cab to where they could live their life and earn a living without being confined. We don't think about that. We don't think about all these effects that PTSD, that war itself has on. You know, war is probably the greatest motivator of the world that's ever been, for positive and negative. It took us out of the Great Depression after World War II started. If you remember, you know, we was in pretty bad straits about the time it started, and but we don't want to use that for example to do anymore because it's not a good thing. But it does create pathways. And that started me on reading, and I have become an addict. You can ask Carrie. I read in the evening when I go to bed. I go to bed about 10:30, and I usually read till about 12:30 or 1 or 2 or 2:30 or 3 or something. You know, when depends on how interesting it is. As of late, I've found a new hero, Abraham Lincoln. I've read about 4,000 pages on him in the last 6 months. And I don't know if any of you knew, but he was an alien. You know that? He was an alien.
He was not of this world.
He had no business being here. He really didn't, you know. No, he was a man of his people. He had that simplicity, but he had something else that makes you wonder where it came from. And I can do you a whole night on Abraham Lincoln. I really could, because he is just the most amazing man in history to me, more so than George Washington or Jefferson or any of those people. He was just the most awesome man in history. But back to what I was talking about. In studying this history, it has opened so many doors to me to find out how we tick, what caused our founding fathers to create the country we have, how they did it, why they did it, what guidelines they have put in it to keep us safe. And I still have a pretty bright forecast for the future. I think that we're strong. I think we'll always be strong. Our only danger comes from within, if it comes from anywhere. I don't think there's a foreign power in the country that can touch us, can do us damage, but not touch us. But I think our danger comes within. Another thing about history is it causes expansion in worlds. Most of the wars in the world were fought over land or food, tribal hunting grounds. You go to Kentucky. How many know what the word Kentucky means? It means a bloody place, is what it means. Because it was the hunting ground, at least in the 18th century, for most of the tribes, but no one was allowed to live there. The old Indian leaders said it was because a bloody war was fought there a couple of centuries before, and it was decided that it would never be lived in by a tribe. If you'll go back and look at your books, you don't see any Indian tribes that actually lived in Kentucky. They were across on the north side of the Ohio, or they were down in Tennessee, or Mississippi or Alabama across there. Yeah. And it has been that way all over the world. It's what brought us as Englishmen, Irishmen, Germans, Scandinavians, whatever all we were, to these shores. The expansion. We had used up all of our resources in Europe. We had to go someplace else. And somebody discovered this bright, shining country over here, a few thousand miles from home. And it had resources that they never dreamed of. You can spend another 2 or 3 days talking about that. how the country was started, how it was colonized, all the wars and everything went on. But you don't think about the lives of the men who did it, what happened to them. You don't take into consideration how impacted they were with the things that they went through, with the wars that they fought, which were bloody in comparison to what we fight. You know, the bloodiest wars in the last few centuries started with the Civil War. The Civil War, the Spanish-American War. Right after the Spanish War was the Philippine Revolt, and there was, I understand, a couple million Philippine people that were killed by our troops during that. A very, very bad thing. We don't want to talk about that because it don't look good for us at all. And then you get into World War I and World War II, which were just horrendous. Korea was fairly bad, but Korea and Vietnam, we all think about all those 50-something thousand men that fell in Vietnam. And that was, you know, that was one day's battle in the Civil War. One day's battle in the Civil War. So it helps to keep your perspective on that. We hear people today talk about revolution or a civil war. And we think 600 and something thousand men fell in that bloody conflict from 1861 to 1865. Were that to happen today, it would be 6 million or 60 million. The experts are not really sure. We don't want that to ever happen. History is the greatest teacher that ever was, if we'll just listen to it. If we can teach it to the kids, to the young people coming up, and not just ask them for, well, what date did George Washington become President of the United States? Or when was Abraham Lincoln assassinated? Or what's the capital of West Virginia? Those things are so boring. They don't teach any history. They don't make you want to know anything about the country. They don't do any of that. All they do is, to me, they were a blot. They were a blot. I wish that we could find ways that we could. I tried to go to the Magnolia schools to talk about Vietnam, and I was shut off immediately. Could not. They wouldn't let me on the grounds. And so many of the other guys. I have one young man who goes to schools, and if sometime you like, I'll have him come and talk to you. He is a motivator. His name is Du Hoa. He is a Vietnamese young man who, in 1978 or 79, I can't remember which it was now, started attempting to escape from Vietnam. He made 15 trials before he ever got out. He used all of his money trying to buy himself onto boats. He got down till he had no money, so he apprenticed himself to a diesel mechanic and learned how to literally build a diesel from the ground up, a nautical diesel, you know, marine diesel, I guess is the proper word. And he could take one apart in his sleep and put it back together. So they started building boats. The first one capsized. The second one got caught, but they didn't get caught. And the third one, they escaped on. They went out 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think it was. They were taken on the water, they were about to sink, and a German ship picked them up. And he went through all the standard things that you hear about, the camps in Malaysia and Indonesia, and then he came to the United States in 81 or 82, something like that. He walked, he come to Houston too, by the way, and he walked 4 miles a day to go to school to learn the English language, there and back every day. He got his language down good enough that he could talk, and then he started going to community college. He got himself a college degree. He went into the Navy. He served in the Navy. He had wing tank of a jet fall off and fall on him and injured his back, which he still suffers from considerably. But he got his pharmacist degree. He's a licensed pharmacist. He just moved to Houston, well, actually he lives in Tomball, just from South Florida. And his story is so remarkable. He wrote a book called My Escapes and My Path to Freedom. Is that something like that? I can't remember exactly. But it inspired me. It's the second book I read after the first. It was the second book I read. And I thought, you know, Larry, it's time to get off your duff and start doing something. You know, you've had a lot of experiences. Well, like I say, if you ever want this young man to come down and talk to you, he will. He's just the greatest guy in the world. I proudly call him my friend. We talked about PTSD. If I can find my page on PTSD, I wanted to tell you some symptoms of it. Now, everybody can have PTSD. You don't have to be a war hero. You know, you can have a car wreck. You can have an encounter that is traumatic. Everything to it. Getting overwhelmed in crowds. I don't go to movie theaters. I did for a while, but I don't do anymore. I just can't bear that. Getting upset or angry at a loud alarm. I won't mention that. Ordinary nightmares that have nothing to do with the circumstances, just stupid nightmares, much more often than the average person. I've had lots of those. One of the most disturbing ones was after Carrie and I actually got together, and it's just as clear to me now as the one night I had it. I was up on a hill shooting down into a village, and after we got through, I found myself down in the village, and there was a small stream there flowing through the village, and there was a baby one floating down the stream. I know it wasn't true, but that would just shock me to death. There's all kinds of things. Getting sharp pains in your neck, collarbones, making it hard to believe, hypervigilance, constant anxiety. Learning that high anxiety does not mean generalized anxiety, like people having panic attacks. One of my pets is I go to a restaurant or someplace. I feel pretty safe here with you guys, but I go to a restaurant or something, I almost never sit with my back, unless I have my back to a wall or where I can see what's going on. I go into a convenience store, and this is 56 years later. They don't leave you all the time. I go into a convenience store. I know whoever is in that store all the time I was there. I watch everybody. I don't take my eyes off anything. It's not as quite as traumatic as it was back years ago, but still I do it. For the first 10 years after I came back from Vietnam, I lived a separate life from my wife that she never knew about. I went out and got in trouble. I stalked people just because I could, not to do anything to them, just because I did. I needed that adrenaline rush. I needed that surge that comes from that experience. That's crazy, isn't it? Just about crazy. And it took me a good 10 years before I realized how crazy it was and finally talked myself out of it. But for the first 3 or 4 years, I wasn't a drinker. I never was a drinker in my life. But I go to a bar and pick a fight, just have a fight. Stupid. One time I realized that, you know, you get yourself killed doing this. PTSD makes you do some stupid things. It makes you do some terrible things. And it doesn't go away. One of the things it says, feeling constantly bored. Well, I never had that problem. I don't know. I spend too much hours doing other things, and I don't think I was ever bored. In fact, my grandkids, every time they bring that up, I say, "You're bored? Come out and hang out with Grandpa for a while. We'll take care of that." But they don't always do that. You know, they've got their own lives. I never had the problem with a racing heart, but I know people that have. You know, that trauma hits them and their heart just runs out of their chest. That doesn't seem to happen to me at all. Maybe our systems is different. It don't affect us all in the same way. It really doesn't. I've spent about, I don't know, too much time thinking about these things in the past. My wife and I, that I was married to then, we broke up in 1980, and bless her heart, I don't know how she put up with me that long, but she did. And I started having some problems and realized that I needed some help, and realized I probably had done a lot of damage to, I had 2 children and everything. And so I found a counselor, and just by sheer luck, he was a Vietnam vet. He was an officer actually. And we started talking about that, and he's the one that turned the key. I don't remember the man's name now. He was up in Oklahoma City, but he started telling me about it. You can't do this stuff. And I said, but I was told to. And he says, yeah, but you can't. He says, it's over with. It's all done with. He says, you need to get it out in the open. And he said something that I tell vets today when I talk to them, is these ghosts don't do well in the daylight. If you talk to them, talk about them rather, and you get them out and you explain it, they just fade away. Maybe not entirely, but they're not as scary anymore. I believe that with my whole heart, because once I started talking about this stuff, it doesn't bother me anymore. And writing that book, like I said, was the best thing I ever did in my life. And if you know any vets, if you're a vet yourself, write this stuff down. This is history, people. This is what kids in the future need to hear. They need to hear about these experiences. They need to know you went to Vietnam and was, waded in the mud for a year and crawled around with mosquitoes and with snakes and tigers and people shooting at you, and it was all because of some rich man's, scheme. Not entirely, I say that, I better not say that, because when we went to Vietnam in 1962, the Vietnamese people needed help. They were being overrun by the communists from the north, which was partially our fault as well. But that makes another story too. But we were doing some good for them. It all went to hell about 2 years later when the military took over the reins of it. It turned into a nightmare. But they need to learn about these nightmares. I've got a grandson that did a tour in Afghanistan a few years ago, and he really doesn't talk about it much. I know they had mortar attacks because he hurt his shoulder during one mortar attack, but I don't know what else he was involved in. But he really don't talk. And I know there's a lot of other guys that don't. And you should. You should. I told him, I said, you need to sit down and write a whole story about what you did while you were there. People need to know this stuff. We know it's not good to hold this stuff inside you. And half of the vets that I talk to is, well, I just don't talk about it. Or Uncle Bill, he never would tell anything. Or Dad, he just didn't talk about it at all. It's not good. I know it hurts sometimes. I know it hurts, but that's not an excuse. You're doing good. $3 years ago, 56 years ago, 3 days from now. Yeah, I know I screwed that one up, didn't I? May 13th, 1962, I boarded a C-119 at Da Nang to come home. And I wrote this is a little excerpt out of my book, Loss of Innocence. I took my bags out of the back and walked to the plane. I showed my papers to the crew chief and he told me that I had my choice of seats. I walked into the huge empty plane and I saw there was only a half a dozen troops with their gear. I sat in the wall seat by the window. The big engines came out. We started our taxi and very quickly we were airborne. The nose pointed at a setting sun. Quickly we banked to the right and I looked out over the jungle as the sun dropped below the mountains where so much had happened to me in the past months. I almost for a moment felt a pang of homesickness, the sorrow at parting. Then we were headed out over the South China Sea. I unfastened my belt and walked out and lay down on the belly cargo door. There was a large crack. I looked down and watched the ocean speed by me, taking me away to another world that right now seemed foreign and unfamiliar. I felt the irony of the moment, and I remember it well now, 30-some odd years later, that I'd come to Vietnam in a loaded plane, and life while there had been so full of so many things. And here now I leave, and my vehicle is empty as I felt that moment. I still feel that way. I went to Clark Air Force Base and was debriefed. The reason I guess I ought to tell you why I came home. My dad had gotten injured back in the States. He had a farm, fairly good sized farm, and he was hospitalized. And this is spring, planting season, you know. And so, did anybody ever hear of a senator named Fulbright from back in those days? Senator Fulbright. Well, he went to school with my mom when she was a girl. Well, she got a hold of Senator Fulbright, and it took Senator Fulbright and the Red Cross 2 weeks to find me, but they found me. And that's how I came home. And I went back to my dad, and I worked with him for a while till he got back on his feet, but I could not live on that farm after all that. I could not function there. I had just lived a whole life that was so different. I could not do that no more. And like I said, I was pretty crazy in the head. And the only thing they didn't tell me was how to go back and cope with that. And you know, they say go home, you know, go back to work, resume your life as a citizen. They don't tell you how. And they still don't do that. Well, they do more anyway, I guess. They've got some programs now. But even in Vietnam, those poor guys coming home from Vietnam, I don't know, how many of you know Vietnam vets that, yeah. They came home and they'd come out of that jungle killing people. 48 hours later, they're at home sitting in mom's living room eating apple pie. Not an idea in the world what they're going to do with the rest of their life. Still ducking from gunshot, from car backfires and people making loud noises or fast moves or something. And they don't tell you that. Well, that was the same thing with me. I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. But I wish they would do more about that. We should get smarter. You know, this is why I'm talking about history. History should teach us how to be smarter. I came home, I helped my dad, I raised a family, and I dreamed about a place far away. I didn't know what was wrong with me until 1981. And that's when I started finding out about PTSD. Well, I hope I've said something tonight that makes you see what I'm thinking of. I probably haven't talked a lot enough, but I never claimed I was the smartest guy in the world and knew all this. But I'm going to leave you with something that, a poem that I wrote about 2 weeks ago. And it kind of, to me, it sums it up. When I was 17, Elvis sang about Heartbreak Hotel. I was strong, and in my youth, life was swell. Bright skies, sunny days, tilling the earth, a simple life filled with laughter and mirth. Then 18 came, adult expected. Begin a career, earn your way, be respected. I get a job and find a place. Then a companion settles in my embrace. I join the rest of the human race. 3 years went by and no time to lose. Elvis was still singing the blues. Then one day when the mailman came, a letter for me, life for me will no longer be the same. Uncle Sam wants you, you healthy young man, to stand nobly, a guard for your homeland. Worry not, there is no sound of war, not heard of here or on foreign shore. Elvis, he had gotten that same call, and he accepted and left us in music hall. No songs came from the king for about 2 years. So settle down, boy, it's your duty, settle your fears. So it's 1962, and I see a foreign shore. I will wish quite soon I'd never opened that door. I find a new world, it's wet and it's hot. The world I grew up in, it's not. Thin, wiry bodies, much shorter than I, trying to earn freedom, willing to die. Dressed in breechclouts, the women bare breast, their home all made from bamboo mats. They eat and they sleep and they seek to be free. My goodness, they're no different from me. My heart was open. I started to care. I wanted to help them. I was proud to be there. Days went by and soon became weeks. Duty had plenty of ebbs and few that peak. Dark deeds came down of which we don't speak. The horrors of war visited the land. Horrors that children need never withstand. Life was hectic and full of alarm. Back home, Elvis was singing Good Luck Charm. Soon time went by and I left there. Work was not finished. I tried not to care. But I left them unprotected, you see. And you know, that really got to me. So I left that land under the hot sun and flew away. I wanted to help those people. I wanted to save, but I can't, told to say nay. But maybe that feeling in me will subside. When I'm with my family, I again abide. I gave it weeks and I gave it months. I wait, but that feeling of failure, it never abates. They suffered horrors. I get to go home. The sin of abandonment, which you never atoned. I rejoin life in the American style. Why do I feel that I'm on trial? I was supposed to be there just for a minute and then say I was not in it, but I was, you see. I tried to help out, and what I did was good, I have no doubt. But to live like that in that special way, it's not like living an ordinary day. Your heart feels different. It's a different you. I tried to regain it for a decade, almost 2, but it was gone, lost back in time. I try now to put those feelings to rhyme. I lived that life for months so few, yet it left scars, most unseen by you. But if you could look deep inside, you'd see odd little quirks, they reside. A sharp noise, a close at hand in part, will cause me a quick start. I seldom enter a crowded place without surveying it first if it's a safe place. I must always be seated back to the wall, trusting no one, wary of all. Now it's 1970, I still survive, it's true. I work for my family, I pay what's due. And Elvis, he's singing The Wonder of You. The war still rages, it sears my heart. Although no longer is my part, I still go there often in my dreams. My wife just wonders about small screens. She doesn't understand the way I think. Oh Lord, I wish that I could drink. To level the field, to put and sink. But that wouldn't happen, not that way. Some say they got there to simply go pray. But for me, it was not the answer, not the way to heal. But the answer was still hiding far afield. We lost Jack and Bobby and Reverend King. And it seemed like we never learned a damn thing. It seems it was then we all came apart. Our hearts not for others, feeling was not. A new generation was born to be, a generation simply named me. Traditions were all cast aside, and business became all that you can bribe. Parents became losers, called that by youth, whose achievements in life had yet no proof. I watched my brothers come home with scars and treat themselves from the fluid squeezed from bars. They got no help from the nation they served. I stood silent and only observed. My fight had been early, and maybe I felt I got a better hand than my brothers were dealt. I watched and I looked and I thought in vain, as Elvis sang, "There goes my everything." My scars didn't heal, nor did I rest.
I never once thought that I did my best. Most people never knew that I went to war. I knew if I told them, they would ask, what for? And my fury would rise and I would want blood. Deep, deep inside me, I knew that was no good. So finally came the year 73. The troops were free. I was still stuck there. What about me? Do I ever get to come home, be all at rest? Is this what I was given to be a test? My thoughts went back most every night to a mountain village in the Central Heights. Did any of them remember a tall young man who came to their home to give them a hand? Well, we lost a president who turned into a louse. And the last I heard, Elvis left the house. He got fat and tired and gave up his song, like so many of us on the right side of wrong. I watched that hell the day Saigon fell, a story I wished we would never tell. We live and we walk in your own land, and we all look like an ordinary man. Some wear caps that say Vietnam vet. That don't tell the whole story, you can surely bet. When you're out shopping and your line gets slow, don't be angry at that old man that stems the flow. Ask him if he was a young man who served overseas. Shake his hand and tell him, thank you, if you please. Now if you wonder why I told you this tale just yet, because I don't want you to ever forget. This is my therapy and my way to fight, and remind you of one soldier's plight. And like Elvis, I will hope you're touched. And thank you all very much.